the three speakers that are going to join us on the stage are three women. So Sarah McPhee-Knowles, who will talk about Yukon case, about inclusion. Sarah, you are member of Democracy R&D. You are associate professor at Yukon University and chair at the Yukon Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform. Thank you for being with us. Fatima, please sit down there. Then Indira Latorre. Where are you, Indira? You are professor at Universidad del Rosario in Bogota, Colombia. You are also you are colleague of Democracy R&D. Thank you, Indira, for talking about great adventure of itinerant assembly in Bogota. And Liliana Kolarski. Liliana, you are PhD candidate. You work at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Belgrade. And we're going to hear what it means inclusion in the Balkan area. So thank you for the three of us and to Fatima to stay in this session. What we have planned is we have planned an introduction because each of the cases that are going to be presented correspond to one very specific area with specific challenge in terms of inclusion. So you will describe where it's happening, what are the key questions for inclusion, and what is happening there. So you will speak during between 5 and 8 minutes maximum. And after we will have a discussion and a dialogue with both rooms. And I already say to the people in room 5 that they will be invited to join again and bring the say of that room in this place. But I will explain how we will do it after. So we have we decided not to have slides except pictures to be in touch physically with the area for at least two of you. And we're going to start with Sarah. And we go to Yukon. Where is Yukon, Sarah? And it should work. Don't worry. Yes. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Oh, I don't know if it's on.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. It's really lovely to be here. My name is Sarah McPhee-Knowles, and I'm joining you from the Yukon Territory, which is a weird and wonderful place. Has anyone heard of the gold rush? Okay. Thank you, Canadian colleagues at Mass. Appreciate you. So yeah, lots of mountains, trees, bears, and we also share borders with Alaska, British Columbia, and the Northwest Territories. The territory is about 482,000 square kilometers, or 16 times the size of Belgium, and home to about 47,000 people. About 20% of whom identify as Indigenous. The average in Canada is about 5%. Almost 80% of Yukoners, including me, live in or around the capital city of Whitehorse, and the rest live in about 17 very small communities scattered around the territory. So all the communities except for Old Crow, which I hope you can see on my map. At the very top there, it's fly-in only. Everywhere else, you have road access. But there's very minimal public transportation between communities, and telecommunications are not always reliable. So last year, I chaired the Yukon Citizens Assembly on electoral reform. You can see them deliberating in the other photo there. Further shout out to Mass for all their support with that initiative. We had 2 participants from the, at the time, 19 electoral districts across the territory, and 2 people from each of these were selected to participate. We met for 4 full weekends between May and September of last year, and members spent time learning from experts about electoral systems, including Jonathan Rose, who's here, and deliberating to make a recommendation and determining shared values. And they came to the recommendation of ranked vote for the territory. We're currently in an election period right now, and there will be a plebiscite, so non-binding referendum with that question on the ballot on November 3rd. So for inclusion, the purpose of this panel, I wanted to just mention 3 things. The first is that there's a lot of tension in being inclusive. The second is that you can use your inclusion priorities in your selection, but you have to do more. And the third is that what inclusion looks like, effective inclusion, will really depend on your local context. So for the first one, for tension and inclusion, we had certain elements within the process that made things more inclusive for some groups, and because you cannot make it perfectly inclusive for everybody all of the time, making it more inclusive for some groups led to less inclusivity for others. And so this is this trade-off in tension. So we had a fairly short process. I started at the beginning of February, and we had to table our report in the legislature by October 31st. We held all the meetings in person, which required our participants from outside of Whitehorse to travel, some up to 1,000 kilometers round trip for a weekend. And their travel was compensated, of course. We don't always have particularly good internet access, so we wanted to maximize relationship building and sharing meals during those weekends together. However, meeting for full weekends to limit the travel time for those who had to come a long ways, rather than only 8 Saturdays, made it even more difficult for participants with young families, especially women, to participate, even though we offered additional compensation for childcare. There was also tension between trying to make our process more inclusive and the interaction with government processes, since this was a government-funded initiative. So we worked very hard to reduce barriers for participants and limit the amount of paperwork that they would have to do. We did not require receipts for people to get compensated for meals while they were traveling or for childcare in particular, because in the local context, there's no formal daycare available on the weekends. But then this, of course, led to me butting heads with the finance department, who was expecting a lot of documentation for everything. The next piece was inclusion, priorities, and selection. So we did not do a more typical civic lottery. The selection pool was instead based on a survey that a preceding legislative committee had conducted on the topic about a year before. And requiring 2 participants for each electoral district controlled for geography, the balance of urban and rural representation, as you can imagine, with such a large percentage of the population living in the capital, was extremely important. And the other criteria were age, gender, and indigeneity. So this was a bit different from other Canadian citizens' assemblies on electoral reform that occurred about 20 years prior. BC added 2 Indigenous members after selection had taken place, and Ontario required by regulation to have 1 Indigenous member to be selected. There's a greater proportion of Indigenous people in the Yukon compared to Canadian provinces, and 11 of the 14 First Nations are also self-governing. And so the context around First Nations in the Yukon is quite different from other places in Canada. Some electoral districts had a very small pool of potential participants, so in those areas where there were not very many people to draw from, I called everybody in those districts and said, please fill out this survey where you may be selected for this initiative. Do you have any questions about what this might look like, what we're asking of you? And that meant that we actually were able to get 2 participants from each district. In one case, in one district, we only had 4 potential participants, so I was very pleased that we were able to get half of them to agree to participate. So we wanted to make sure people in those smaller, more remote districts were included. The last one that I wanted to talk to that's really specific to inclusion and what matters for inclusion, being particular to your local context. We had an Indigenous elder in residence present to support all of our sessions. His name is Ernie. He's Dene. He's from the Northwest Territories originally, but was a student at UConnU where I teach. So I had met him there and invited him to take part in the process. And Ernie brought in a really interesting design element after the first day. I picked him up the next morning to take him to the session. He says, I have an idea. I want to try something. I said, sure, anything you like. He goes, I think we need to do a closing circle with my talking stick. And we'll pass that around to give everybody a way to an opportunity to speak using the talking stick. And I said, sure, we can give this a try. And it ended up being extremely powerful and really rooted in Ernie's Indigenous worldviews. And this incorporation of Indigenous worldviews was really important for our local context, and it had this additional effect of really encouraging participation and being something that was extremely meaningful for participants. So the 3 points, just to summarize, were that there will be tension in inclusion. There are always trade-offs. You need to be very conscious of the local context and what is necessary for inclusiveness within that context, because it will be different depending on where you are. And one way of doing this, of course, is to include those inclusion priorities in your selection criteria if that's possible within your context, but always being aware of where that may not be enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, this aspect of low density area is, of course, extreme in the situation that you have presented, but it's something that we all meet in our country. We have all low density areas, and this question of inclusion, participatory democracy in those areas is fundamental as well, so we probably face that. So before we go to India and to Bogota, I propose, because we are going to have 3 speech in total before you react. So I give you 45 seconds to consider what you just heard, how it reflects on your practice, and then we will go to Bogota. So let's cross the American continent and go from Yukon to Bogota. So India.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
What happens in Bogota?
What happens in Bogota? How many people from Bogota is in this room? Okay.
We have the youngest participant from Bogota.
Okay. Thank you for me here. I'm very happy to be here today and to share with you 2 ways to make citizens' assemblies more inclusive. The first is about how we design citizens' assemblies, in which the model that we call, with my colleagues, the sequential model. And the second is about the participatory ripple effects that come from sortition itself, and this is related with what Fatima just said. Actually, both ideas come from the practice in Bogota. You can see there the picture from Bogota. So let me first set the scene, and it's just to say that Bogota is the country's capital, home to roughly 8 million people, across 1,700 kilometers. And it's also a very unequal country, an unequal city. You can see here like the 2 faces of Bogota. So this is why I think inclusion is very important in a city like Bogota. It's very important when we think about organizing citizens' assemblies. Just think that an assembly of 60 people doesn't seem the most satisfactory in terms of inclusion. So Bogota, as I told you, is one of the most unequal cities in Colombia, and Colombia itself is among the most unequal countries in the world. So this is why I think innovation happens in countries like this. And the first innovation is about sequentiality. Over the past 5 years, working with Instituto, IDEMOS, Fundación Corona, among others, we've organized close to 10 deliberative processes in Bogota in which this sequentiality becomes one of the central ideas. And is that when a citizen assembly first took off about 2 decades ago, most follow what we can call the unitary model, in which one randomly selected group does everything. No? The same group learns, deliberate, draft recommendations. But what if we think in sequences, instead of a single group? So in a sequential model, the picture that you will be see here is the itinerant citizens assembly. In these kind of assemblies, one group designs the assembly, another defines the remit, another group develops alternatives, another can develop final recommendations, and another can evaluate the impact. So what you are doing here is more people can take part over time without sacrificing all the things that we know, that is the quality of deep deliberations. So I think that's the idea behind the itinerant citizens assembly, and also the idea and the logic that guides the meta-deliberation assembly last year. Just to say more about this case, the itinerant citizens assembly was a process that took place in 2020, 2021, and 2023. The chapters varied in size. So the first one had 110 people, the second 60 people, and the third 70. That's a total of 240 people. And that's hardly been able to participate. These people who have hardly been able to participate in just a single assembly, given the time and budget constraints. So what is happening here in this sequential model is like in a meta-deliberative assembly that is actually currently taking place in Bogota, is that we are splitting the tasks of the assembly. Another concrete and very important example that I want to bring today is the first meta-deliberative assembly that took place last year. This is very important. I want to bring attention to this because that assembly, the sole task of that assembly is just to design futures assemblies. So instead of outsourcing rules and government and governance to experts, we ask citizens to do it. So it's the people in itself who decides the criteria for participant selection. The people in itself is the one who is doing the guidelines for deliberation and who is say something about the mechanism for oversight and follow through. So by splitting roles across the stages, we are multiplying the number of people who could contribute to deliberation. My second point is just related with what Fatima was said, and is that sortition and deliberation and participation, excuse me, is doing something more than just to have 50 people or 100 people on the table. So the participants are also included in when we are contacted. We are inviting people. We are meeting people in park streets. We are inviting people in neighborhoods. So we are meeting people, not just sending letters, but doing something more. So we are reaching people in another way. And lastly, also, it's very important to say that in the meta-deliberation assembly, 85% of registered participants have never been taking part in any participatory process in Bogota. So for the first time, they are receiving an invitation. And they receive two types of invitation. The first one is the normal, what we just know. We select these people for the gender, age, locality, but we do something intentionally here, and is that we included 18 people from historically excluded groups. So we included LGBTQ+ presidents, people with disabilities, Afro-Colombian racial, Palenquero communities, indigenous people, victims for the armed conflict, and this has to do with in a very intentionally manner. So I believe that these practices I've mentioned can continue, can help us to innovate in the terms of inclusion in participatory and deliberative democracy.
What a wonderful example, Indira. Wonderful example of, because this question of inequalities that you stressed in the beginning is something that we experience in every city and every areas, and also this will to be radically inclusive, as you explained, plus the idea of creating more and more impact by engaging new people. So it's a wonderful example. Thank you very much, Indira.
Thank you.
So before we hear Liliana, same thing. How does it reflect in you, in your practice? This example that was presented, 40 seconds. So let's go to the Balkan. So we are in Europe.
That's
you have
right.
here many people from outside in those two rooms. So tell us, Liliana, where we are going now. What is the specificity of this set of countries in the southeast of Europe and what you did there? Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me, right? And thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad that I can bring this perspective from the Western Balkans. As you may know, Western Balkans represent a region which is quite complex. As you can see, the map consists of several countries, and it's also home of nearly 18 million people. When we talk about 18 million people, that means that we do share and we do have a very similar mentality. But on the other side, we are very different. So we have different languages, different religions, and also we can talk about 15 or more ethnicities. Regardless of all these differences, there are still, and unfortunately, some things that really connect us. That's a deeply rooted war legacy, unfortunately, that was happened during the 90s, that even today shapes the relationships between the countries, but also between the societies. Another thing which is common for all these countries is that our countries tend to be EU member states. However, we do face certain challenges. What is really common is that we face restricted media freedom, that we have seen corruption, shrinking civil space, weak institutions, high citizens' distrust in institutions, and also authoritarian tendencies, which is maybe the most prominent in Serbia is the most prominent example. So the question is, if you do not have democracy and you have a hybrid regime, how you can organize that kind of a deliberative process. Well, we managed. So within the EU project that lasted for 2 years called Combating Disinformation in the Western Balkans, conducted by European Partnership for Democracy, we conducted 4 citizens' assemblies in 4 Western Balkan countries. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Montenegro, in Serbia, and also in Kosovo that is declared as independent state here. These 4 citizen assemblies meant that in each country we did a random selection and that each citizen assembly gathered between 40 and 45 citizens. And we had the same criteria, which means age, gender, region, and education. But again, what Sarah mentioned, and Fatima and Indira as well, context is something that is really important, and I really want to emphasize, especially this political context that really shapes the conditions and set the trajectory of what you can do. You can strive for this inclusiveness, but of course to do as much as you can in the given context and under certain circumstances. So I don't think that don't think and don't say that what we did was the best, but we did our best as much as we could. So when it comes to the participation and with inclusion, with a random selection, it is based also, it's inevitable when we talk about inclusion, but I think we should make one step behind, and what's really connected to inclusion is sortition. So sortition is usually deemed as a technical mechanism, and it is, but this technical mechanism is a cornerstone. How you put the sortition will definitely define how you or up to what extent you will have the inclusive society or inclusive participation. So again, the context. Unlike Ireland or France, when you have this top-down approach, which means that usually citizens' assemblies or any kind of deliberative processes are run by, initiated by a country, by government, in the Western Balkans, we have never ever had that. So what we see is the bottom-up approach. It's a double-edged sword. It has its own pros and cons. Here we had a situation that this bottom-up approach means the country still hasn't recognized its deliberative process as a meaningful and powerful tool for citizen participation besides elections. Again, all these bottom-up approaches are really time-limited. They are project-based, and they are run by local NGO with the support or international organization. I don't say that's necessarily bad. It's usually desirable to have country and the state. But in our context, maybe that we had this bottom-up approach was better. Why? Because this is the sortition issue. Once when the nation, usually when there is country that initiates the citizen assemblies, country has the approach to entire citizens pool, which means to voter register, and that means inclusion, that every citizen has an equal opportunity to be selected and to participate. What we can hear in our situation, we do not have approach because we do not cooperate with a country, so we cooperate with so-called very popular and professional public survey agencies. They usually have a huge pool of the citizens. Someone might say, okay, this is random sample. It could be your quasi-sample. It could be a quasi-random, quasi-sample, but again, we did as much as we can. We were lucky because people from that pool was the people who did and participated in citizens' assemblies for the first time. But in order to engage, in order to give up, to reach these hard-to-reach target groups, we did a snowballing. What does it mean? It means that usually research agencies have a really developed research and network on the ground. So you literally do that your sample grows as a snowball, which means if you try and you manage to reach at least one person from underrepresented community, there is high possibility that that person would reach to other representatives of their community. But also we had another example, which I think is really good, that was in Kosovo. In the Kosovo citizens' assemblies, we also had a situation that 94% Albanians, and other percentages are shared between Serbs, which are the biggest national minority, and other minorities. When I say other minorities, there are many of them. You have Macedonian, you have Ashkali, Turkey, Gorani, how to integrate all of them. So we decided to approach to and to do some kind of a mirror, institutional mirror, which means we looked at the Kosovo parliament and did the copy-paste version. So it's some kind of an institutional equality mechanism. It's the highest representative body. It's legitimate. It's fair, it's known. So what we did, instead of having, which is usually desirable as social demographic mirror, we had institutional mirror, and we enhanced the number of participants. So yes, still we had a majority of Albanians, which that's reality. But instead of having 4% of participants among Serbs, we had 8. Instead of 4 of others, we had 8. So that means that you also have to adjust your citation and inclusion depending on your context.
Thank you very much for this example in an area where the diversity of communities is so important, because no one can be left outside the process, otherwise it can generate very difficult situation. Thank you very much. Liliana? So let's take sometimes to how does this reflect on you. So let's go to you in both rooms. Before, so I don't want to give the microphone before you have a discussion. So coming here in this plenary, focused on radical inclusion. So what did you get from it, and what is your next move on inclusion? So I give you 4 minutes in both rooms to have discussions in 3 or 4 persons. Just make a co-interview. What do you take from this discussion, and how does it help you in your practice? Because you are here as a community, as a network to improve our practice. And then I will give the floor to 2 persons from room 5 that will come here, 2 persons here, and I will invite you to react to what you will hear, and you will have less than 1 minute each. Okay, so let's go 4 minutes by group of 4, and you introduce yourself, you go with other person, you turn yourself, you discover new members of the network, which is a beautiful network. Thank you. Can we have the next slides, please? So as we will not have the possibility to listen to everyone who is present in the room, on this QR code, you can leave your message, your key message, and we will collect all the message and we will use them in the minutes of the session. So if you have something important as legacy, or if you have a key message on inclusion, please share it, because it's important, as I will give the floor only to 4 persons here, that we can collect all your reactions, and please take the time to do it. So let's go to the back of the room.
Hi, my name is Amkuku. I'm from Myanmar. Actually, I'm based in Thailand right now after the military coup in 2021. So I'm actually, my organization called Mosaic Myanmar, which is actually, we've been promoting the ITR inclusion in Myanmar and protecting the minorities, especially religious minorities. So thank you so much for like a keynote speaker and panelists. Actually, I came from the Warsaw, so I'm trying to understand, compare the case, how establish democracy and inclusion and how civil war context and inclusions. So Myanmar, like we have more than 135, and also the Rohingya genocide is also happening. So I mean, like that the future of our country is like really, lined how to build an inclusive nation together. So I learned a lot of, insight from all of your countries, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us from Myanmar. Hello, Joe.
Okay, so in our group we were discussing two questions.
So who are you, Joe?
From the, sorry, I'm Giovanni Allegretti. I'm researcher from the University of Coimbra in Portugal, and I just finished to coordinate a 4-year European project about participation and environmental transition. So our questions are two, and based on your idea of radical democracy on one side, and the other one, you quoted trust as a fundamental element in the beginning of your speech. And we wanted to know in all these cases how trust issue was worked, because trust is normally the motivation for which politicians invest in participation. They want to create new form of trust, but in the end of small assemblies, trust is the most difficult thing because the communication between the small group and the macro group is difficult. So we wanted to know how this worked.
Thank you.
The second,
The
second one is very fast. Sometimes the risk of participation is to reduce to a negotiation among the people that is there. So in your assemblies, did you try to represent others that cannot have their voice, like future generations or non-humans? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Second person from room 5. And so you have the questions.
Hi.
Trust and
Thank you for the
represented.
opportunity. I'm the second man. We'll make sure that the next room becomes more inclusive next time. So,
It's okay.
I have a question
you?
for. I am
Tell
Valyan.
us.
I am Valyan from NDI National Democratic Institute. It's a DC-based organization. I work from Kosovo, Western Balkans, and cover the Western Balkans as well. I have a question for Liliana, which was very intriguing and interesting on using citizen assemblies to combat disinformation, knowing that the region is in the second line after the Central Europe with Russian disinformation and some Chinese influence as well. I wonder how you found citizen assemblies combating disinformation and maintaining information integrity while one of the cleavages being used by bad actors and foreign malign influence is interethnic relations. It's one of them that has been very much used and misused in the region to start conflict, to apply disinformation and spread the news. So how we maintain truth in an environment which is volatile and still remember the past and did not deal with the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So last contribution, if we can have a woman that take the microphone to finish this round.
Hi, I'm Sanskriti from Center for Environment Education in India. And it was very interesting to learn about the different methods of getting an inclusive group into the room. And I really appreciated the quote from Mahatma Gandhi. I want to also understand how the idea of inclusion is carried forward into the design of the deliberation itself, considering aspects like lack of literacy, very different learning styles. I think a couple of years ago in Copenhagen, Nicole had also said that the way people process information, which is absolutely new to them because their context is very different, you may not be able to do it in 1 hour or 2 hours of sitting together. Very different lived experience. So, who are the facilitators? Do they know the context of the people in the room? Are they really able to take forward inclusion into the deliberation? And of course, there are gender and socioeconomic, which are more regularly understood. But when we say the reality of a homeless person who has not got any literacy, with a person it's not just about the power, it's that the world is very, very different.
Thank
So
you.
how is the facilitation done inclusively?
Thank you very much for this fundamental question. So I have a very bad news for you. You will not have coffee. No, it's not true. But we don't have 30 more minutes to continue the exchange. So each question deserves at least 15 minutes to answer, but we don't have that time. So I will ask each of you to choose one of them and to be short in your answer and consideration, because these topics are fundamental. They will not be solved in the next minute, but it's really an opening. Your remarks are an opening for further discussions, and we will have the break and so on to continue this. And Fatima, you will be the last one to have the floor before I conclude.
Okay, thank you. I will speak to the last question on facilitation and inclusion in the room. I think we had table facilitators who were university students at each table, and that was very helpful for keeping tabs on which participants were disengaging, maybe not understanding, and they were able to let me and the other organizers know if there were people who seemed confused or needed some more help. I did follow-up phone calls in between sessions, checking in with people. We did make information available in multiple formats, so we had video or audio recordings of certain components. We had handouts if people wanted them. We made transcripts available of certain things. So we did try to make information available to people in different formats, but I still think because of the compressed nature of the process, there were some who moved really fast and they were understanding all the concepts really quickly and very well. And there were others for whom this was more of a struggle. And the tension with the timeline was that we were not, I think there were some people who would have needed more time. I remember one participant, an older gentleman who had been an appliance repair technician for his whole career, lovely guy, came to my office to pick something up in between sessions, and he said, "I think I'm finally starting to get it." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's good." And he's like, "Yeah." So this is, I think, a challenge.
I'll try to answer everything. When it comes to this approach, usually the target group determines the approach. So, but I would stick to one thing, that's definitely simple language and approach, because using this institutional language could simply reject people of taking part because they will feel that they are not a good fit for this. How we build this trust, but I think that, again, the context in the citizens' assemblies in the Western Balkans, people are very disappointed in political parties, in elections. They think they cannot change anything with that. So this was a deliberative process unknown to them, something completely different, and they decided to take part in. Again, what is really important for this trust and inclusion as well, maybe we are not willing to mention it, but simply that's really important, especially in the countries like in a region when we have a really low standard of living. Try to remove every single barrier you can, which is related to giving some incentives to them for their participation, to pay maybe transportation, accommodation, because that means to them. It's very rare that people will simply devote their weekend and talk about some maybe hypothetical or abstract topic, and then to know nothing about what will happen afterwards. So you make sure to do that. And also just for the Kosovo, when mentioned, well, that's we usually underestimate citizens. They have this maybe they do not have this professional, so to say, knowledge, but they are very clever and they know who is sharing all and starting with this information. So we catch them with this low standard of living, with the shared problem, and they are really usually good aware. They have a really rationale behind why they want to participate.
Okay. We mainly have been dealing with inequality, so, and of course this is related to trust. So I think regarding Sanskritin's question, this is about how we innovate in facilitation, no? So how we do enter emotions in deliberation, how we enter different things that are not letters, that are not graphs, that are pictures, that are different kind of formats that can enter to deliberation. But I also think that we all need to think and to innovate sortition. Sortition seems to be an innovation for democracy, but not for inclusion. So we need to think something more. We need to think on ideas of how we can involve nature, how we can involve non-humans, future generations, of course. But of course, as we are in Colombia and in Bogota, and inequality is one of our main focus today. So maybe the global north and in learns with the global south can work on do that. But we need more innovation in sortition.
Yeah, it's an unfinished process, and we have a lot to improve before us. Thank you. Fatima, you have the closing words. So what resonates in you at this moment?
I want to say that for me, it was truly impressive to see how we share the same challenges. Sometimes you feel alone and you think that you are, it's just your situation, but when I listen to you, I say, oh, wow, it's fantastic, and we need to continue to share experiences, good practices. It's refreshing, so I don't know how we can continue this conversation because it's very important, and let's make sure that we always put in the center of our methodology trust, but also empathy, generosity, because there is also the question, when you talk with these people, they always have in their mind, what is in it for me? And that's very important to tackle this question, to build something strong together. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the four of you for your generosity, your trust in the process, and the information that you shared with us. So it's time to close this session. Sarah is going to join us. So you know the big public health issue that is the eco-anxiety. We have a new coming, which is the demo anxiety. And for both of those big issues, the only response is reality therapy. It's to act. And we had this morning fantastic examples of action, and we are all doers, and this is the best way to do. So I'm very proud to be part of this community, and I thank you very much for your presence in this session in both rooms. Thank you.